Shaquille O'Neal built an empire, but one storm-soaked girl at his door is about to shake its foundation. Lila Tremont arrives covered in mud. No appointment, no privilege, only truth and raw determination. Inside the glass tower, betrayal whispers through boardrooms, and not everyone wants Big Shaq to stay on top. As hidden enemies close in, Shaq must decide, protect his power or risk everything to stand for justice. One choice, one girl, one moment, and Big Shaq's legacy will never be the same. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sky over Midtown Manhattan hung heavy with gray, soaking the city in a relentless spring downpour. From the 42nd floor of the O'Neal Equity Partners building, the world looked polished and perfect, all glass, steel, and order. Inside, the lobby hummed with low conversation, the sound of heels clicking across tile, and the gentle whir of the espresso machine beside the minimalist reception desk. It was just another corporate Monday, until the elevator doors opened, and everything changed. She didn't belong. That much was immediately, irrevocably clear. The young woman who stepped into the marble-floored lobby was soaked to the skin, her coat drenched, her boots leaving dirty, squelching prints with every step. Her hair clung to her face in muddy tendrils, her blouse was stained, her hands trembling as she gripped a plastic folder warped with moisture. Security shifted uneasily. The receptionist's fingers froze mid-keystroke. "Miss, can I help you?" the front desk attendant asked, her voice pinched. "I'm here for the internship interviews," the woman stammered. "Lila Tremont. My car broke down. I walked." A few seconds of silence stretched painfully. Behind her, two other candidates in pressed suits watched with uncomfortable smirks. One of the assistants leaned in toward the front desk. "She's not on the schedule. She missed her time slot." "I emailed," Lila offered weakly. "Tried to reschedule. Got no reply." The front desk manager was already shaking her head. "We can't, this is a secured floor. I'm sorry, but..." That's when the voice cut through the murmurs, smooth and deep like it had stepped out of a gospel track and into real time. "Let her in." All eyes turned toward the towering figure standing just beyond the security gate, in a tailored navy suit, hands in his pockets, gold cufflinks glinting like subtle fire. Shaquille O'Neal, CEO, legend, Big Shaq himself. His eyes were on Lila, not with judgment, but with a quiet, unreadable focus. "You walked through this storm for an unpaid internship?" he asked, not sarcastically, curiously. Lila nodded, breath hitching. "I had to." Shaq stepped forward, extending a hand that dwarfed hers. She hesitated a moment, before shaking it. Her palm was cold, and her eyes darted around like a cornered animal. "Come on in," Shaq said. "You're already one interview ahead just by showing up."
He didn't say it to embarrass her. He said it because he meant it. And because 30 years ago, he'd stood on sidewalks just like she must have. Hungry, soaked, unseen.
Inside the conference room, the rest of the candidates sat in crisp rows, resumes printed on premium linen paper. Shaq led Lila past them without comment, the mud on her boots smearing faintly across the tile. The HR director leaned toward him, whispering, "She's not on the list, Mr. O'Neal." Shaq didn't stop walking. Then add her to it. Upstairs, in the high-ceilinged executive suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city, Shaq took a quiet moment. He leaned on the edge of his desk, watching the rain streak down the glass, thinking of his mother, Lucille, and the stories she used to tell, of being turned away, underestimated, dismissed for how she looked, how she spoke, where she came from. He remembered trying to get his first sponsorships, walking into meetings where people looked through him, not at him. He remembered their polite smiles, and sharper rejections. Now he sat at the top of a building that bore his name, but the ghosts of those early years still lingered, reminders not of pain but of purpose. Back in the interview room, Lila sat dripping on a leather chair, her portfolio still soggy in her lap. The other candidates kept their distance. A young man whispered to the woman beside him, "She's not serious, can't even get to an interview clean." Shaq entered quietly, catching that remark. He said nothing. Instead, he walked to the head of the room, folded his arms, and said, "Tell me something true." The room fell silent. "That's your task," he said. "Forget your degrees, your credentials, your PowerPoint slides. I want each of you to tell me something true. Something that matters to you. And I'll decide who gets a second round, based on that." The candidates blinked. Some scrambled mentally to repackage their rehearsed pitches. Lila sat frozen. Her hands were shaking harder now. One by one, the others spoke. Safe answers. Polished statements about career growth. Long-term impact. Synergy. Then it was Lila's turn. She looked up at Shaq. Something in his face told her she didn't need to lie. I grew up on a dirt road in Arkansas. She began, voice uneven. Third trailer on the left. No heat most winters. My mom worked nights at the chicken processing plant. I read by flashlight, and sometimes that was all the light we had. A pause. The room was breathless. I don't come from much, but I came here because I'm not afraid to work. I've cleaned motel bathrooms, stocked shelves, babysat for families who wouldn't look me in the eye. I studied online, took community college classes, saved up gas money in a coffee can, and today I walked 5 miles through the rain, because I believe this place gives people like me a shot. She blinked fast, brushing a tear that slid down her cheek. And if you don't pick me, I'll still find a way, because I always do. Shaq didn't smile, he just nodded slowly.
No applause.
No affirmations, just a moment of real silence. The kind you only hear when truth hits the floor like thunder. Afterward, as the candidates were let out, the HR director pulled Shaq aside. This will be a PR issue, she said under her breath. Someone like her will catch flack. Shaq turned to her, voice low and level. Then let him talk. We're not building a company for optics. We're building one for people. As the doors closed behind them, Lila sat alone in the hallway, the mud drying on her boots, unaware of the quiet storm she had just set off. Shaq returned to his office, but his mind wasn't on balance sheets or investor decks. It was on a girl with fire in her eyes and mud on her coat, and the feeling that something had just shifted beneath the marble floors of the tower. And outside, the rain kept falling. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was thick, heavy with the scent of coffee and the crackle of quiet judgments. The fluorescent lights above glared harshly down on the long walnut table, where the decision-makers of O'Neal Equity Partners sat. Shaquille O'Neal stood tall at the head, his broad frame commanding attention, though his expression remained calm, watchful. Across from him, the mud-streaked woman sat, fingers clenched tightly around the armrests of her chair. "Your name again, miss?" asked Marla Desmond, head of operations, her tone clipped, eyebrow arched in subtle disapproval. Lila's lips trembled slightly, her breath hitching. Lila Tremont. She swallowed hard, brushing damp hair back from her flushed face. From Winslow, Arkansas, population 812. She gave a faint, self-deprecating smile. Well, maybe 810 now. A lot of people don't stick around. There was a ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter from some of the board, but not from Travis Harlan. The CFO sat stiffly, arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes fixed on Lila, with an intensity that went beyond skepticism. It was personal. Shaq noticed it. "So you walked here?" Shaq's voice was gentle, but his question hung in the air like a test. "My car died 2 miles from the train station. I didn't have the money for a cab," Lila admitted quietly. "I couldn't miss this interview. So yeah, I walked the rest of the way." Somewhere near the end of the table, a man in a sleek gray suit scoffed under his breath. Marla shot him a warning glance but didn't correct him aloud. Travis leaned forward, his voice smooth and controlled. "And what exactly do you think you can offer this company, Miss Tremont? We have Ivy League graduates, MBAs, candidates with corporate experience." Lila's hands tightened in her lap. "I can offer what they can't. I know how to solve problems with no resources. I know how to work past no. I know how to listen to people nobody else hears." Shaq felt a quiet stirring in his chest. Pride? Admiration? Maybe recognition. His eyes softened slightly as his memory drifted backward, unbidden, to a kitchen in Newark, New Jersey, where a young Shaquille sat at a wobbly table, head bowed, while his mother, Lucille, gently scolded him for sulking after a schoolyard fight. "When they look down on you," Lucille had said firmly, tilting his chin up with one finger, "you stand taller by lifting someone else. You hear me, baby? We rise by lifting, not by striking." Shaq had carried that memory through years of basketball courts, endorsement deals, failed business ventures, and finally into the marble floors of this tower. Now as he watched Lila, small, mud-covered, determined, he felt that old lesson hum like a steady drumbeat in the back of his mind. But the room around him had no patience for sentimentality. Travis was already flipping through a folder. We did a background check when you applied, Miss Tremont. I see here you left your last job under questionable circumstances. Care to explain? Lila's face tightened. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. She shifted in her seat, fingers twisting together. That was a misunderstanding, she said quietly. I reported something I shouldn't have, and they decided I was a liability. Shaq's brow furrowed slightly. Reported what? Lila took a breath, gathering herself. They were underpaying the Black and Latino workers. I brought it up, filed a complaint. A week later, they said I wasn't fitting into the company culture. Her voice cracked faintly on the last words. But she lifted her chin, defiant. There it was. Shaq felt the weight shift in the room, tension sharpening, the polite mask of the board thinning to something colder. Travis let out a slow exhale, the hint of a smile curling at the corners of his mouth. So you're a troublemaker, or someone who stands up when they see wrong, Shaq said softly, cutting in. His gaze didn't leave Travis. Depends how you look at it. Travis's jaw clenched, but he didn't reply. Marla cleared her throat, glancing between them. We can continue the interviews with the other candidates. No, Shaq said. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed like a hammer. I want to hear her out. Fully. Lila's shoulders sagged with a shaky breath. For a moment the room was filled only with the sound of the rain pelting the windows, the steady tick of a wall clock, and the low hum of nerves dancing beneath the surface. Shaq turned slightly, his voice softening as he addressed Lila directly. Tell me, Lila, why this company? Why O'Neal Equity? Lila looked up, eyes glassy but fierce. Because you're the only company I could find that didn't just have a diversity statement on paper. You've funded minority-owned startups. You've backed community programs. You talk about giving people a seat at the table. I wanted to see if you meant it. Shaq let the words settle, feeling the slow burn of emotion rise in his chest. Travis gave a sharp laugh. Mr. O'Neal, we don't have to let ourselves be guilt-tripped by every bleeding heart who— Travis, Shaq interrupted quietly. I said I wanted to hear her. A crack of tension snapped through the room. Lila's fingers gripped the edge of the chair, her voice trembling but unbroken. I know I don't look like much right now. I know I don't have the pedigree or the polish. But I've fought for everything I have, and I want to help build something that actually makes room for people like me. That's all I'm asking. A chance. Shaq exhaled slowly, his eyes flicking to Travis, then to Marla, then back to the determined young woman sitting before him. Suspense curled at the edges of the room like smoke. Was she telling the truth? Was this grit or a gamble? And why, Shaq wondered, was Travis so determined to block her? As the meeting wrapped, and the candidates were escorted out one by one, Shaq stayed seated, watching the rain run down the glass like silver veins. Something wasn't adding up. And he could feel it, not just in Lila's shaky words, but in the sharp-edged resistance in Travis's gaze. A name she could barely speak. A past she couldn't escape. But maybe, Shaq thought quietly, just maybe, a future she could still claim. The glass walls of O'Neal Equity Partners shimmered under the gray sky, towering above the street like a monument to power. But inside, behind the sleek conference rooms and polished desks, an undercurrent pulsed whispers, doubts, and eyes watching every move. Shaquille O'Neal stood at his office window, arms crossed, feeling the weight of it pressing in. His face in the glass looked calm, but behind his eyes, thoughts churned. He had built this company on a vision, not just to grow wealth, but to grow people, to lift communities, to give voices to those left outside the boardroom doors. But lately the murmurs were growing. Rumors slipped through the walls like cold drafts. He's too soft, too emotional, not sharp enough for corporate America. Shaq had heard the criticisms for years. On and off the court, too big, too loud, too playful, too driven by heart. Now, as CEO, those whispers carried sharper edges. He could feel them swirling now, especially after the Lila Tremont interview. Downstairs, Lila sat alone in the hallway outside the boardroom, clutching the damp edges of her folder. She'd changed seats 3 times, trying to look casual, but her legs were shaking, and the cold of her soaked clothes was starting to bite deep into her bones. Her eyes darted toward the glass door where the board was gathered. She could see their silhouettes, the sharp gestures, the impatient pacing. She had no idea what they were saying, but the tone was clear. They were debating her fate. Suddenly a soft voice pulled her attention. Here, miss. She turned to see an older black man, dressed in a janitor's uniform, holding out a clean white towel. His badge read Elijah. His face was lined, his hands rough from decades of work, but his eyes were kind. "Thank you," Lila whispered, startled by the small kindness. Elijah smiled gently. "You're the girl who walked through the storm, huh? They've been talking about you all morning." Lila's cheeks flushed. "I just wanted a chance." Elijah nodded slowly. "I know, baby. I've been cleaning these halls 20 years. I see who gets chances and who don't. You hang on. Don't let him shake you." Inside the boardroom, Marla Desmond was tapping her pen against the table, her voice tight. "Shaq, with all due respect, this is a bad look. We can't bring in someone like her. She's already got red flags on her record." Travis Harlan leaned back, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Agreed. She's got a history of stirring up trouble. Discrimination complaints. HR reports. We don't need that baggage here." Shaq narrowed his eyes. "Funny. I don't remember you caring about fairness complaints when they were filed against our competitors, Travis." Travis's jaw tightened. "There's a difference between pushing for fairness and being a liability." Shaq let the room fall into an uneasy silence, his mind flicking back over the facts. Something was off. The intensity of Travis's pushback didn't feel like standard corporate caution. It felt targeted. His phone buzzed on the table. A new email. Subject: confidential. Lila Tremont record. No sender listed. No signature. Just an attachment. Shaq opened the file, frowning. It was a flagged report from a corporate investigation. Accusations that Lila had leaked sensitive data from her previous employer. Nothing had been proven. No charges filed. But the stain was there, buried in the system. "Where did this come from?" Shaq muttered. Marla leaned over, peering at the screen. "I didn't authorize that poll. That's from a private channel." Shaq's heart thudded. Someone was feeding this quietly, deliberately, trying to kill Lila's shot before she even got off the ground. His gaze flicked up. Travis sat very still, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a flash of satisfaction too quick to hide. Shaq leaned back, exhaling slowly. Down the hall, Lila dried her hands with the towel Elijah had given her, heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to run, to leave before they could tell her no. But something made her stay seated. Maybe stubbornness, maybe pride, maybe hope. Inside, Shaq looked across the table, his voice calm but carrying an edge now. "I want to know who sent this file, and I want it traced before the end of the day." Marla hesitated. "Shaq, you can't just—" "Yes, I can." His voice was soft steel. He stood slowly, smoothing the front of his tailored suit. "Let's take a break. We'll resume in an hour." As the board members filed out, murmuring in hushed tones, Travis stayed seated, pretending to scroll through his phone. Shaq watched him quietly, noting every subtle tick, every practiced shrug. There was a game being played here, and Shaq had just realized he was a few moves behind. He stepped out into the hall, his towering figure casting a shadow across Lila's seat. She looked up, startled. "Walk with me," Shaq said simply. They moved down the long corridor, past glass offices and bustling assistants. Shaq didn't speak for a while, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he stopped near the window, hands resting on the railing, as he looked out over the rain-slicked city. "You didn't leak anything from your last job, did you?" Lila froze. "No," she said quietly. "I filed a complaint. That's all." Shaq nodded slowly. "Thought so." She swallowed, confused. "Why are you helping me?" Shaq turned, a faint smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Because people helped me when nobody else would. And because you walked through a storm to sit in that chair." For a long moment, they just stood there, two figures framed against the skyline, a giant of industry and a mud-covered stranger, with nothing but her stubbornness. And somewhere inside the building, behind closed doors and encrypted emails, someone was watching, calculating, trying to pull the strings. Shaq could feel it now. The game was on, and he was no longer just fighting for Lila. He was fighting for the soul of the company he'd built. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone in his corner office, the floor-to-ceiling windows casting shadows across the polished wood as rain traced slow lines down the glass. The file lay open on his desk, a thin folder that felt heavier than it should. Inside, the details were clear. Lila Tremont, former junior analyst, had filed a formal discrimination complaint against her previous employer, accusing them of wage disparities, exclusion from projects, and retaliation when she spoke up. The case had gone nowhere, dismissed internally as unsubstantiated, and quietly buried. Now Travis Harlan, O'Neal Equity's sharp-eyed CFO, was pushing hard to block her. "We can't bring her in, Shaq," Travis had said in the last board meeting, voice cool and practiced. "This girl's a walking lawsuit. She's already shown she's willing to stir up HR problems. It's not worth the risk." Shaq leaned back in his chair, massive hands steepled under his chin. He could hear Travis's voice even now, echoing faintly through the walls, laughing quietly with two other board members. He knew their type: polished, strategic, the kind who knew how to frame self-interest as caution, how to use professional concerns to mask something uglier. Shaq's mind drifted back, unbidden, to the memory of his mother, Lucille, standing at their kitchen sink in Newark. He was 15, taller than most men already, frustrated with school, angry at a teacher who kept shutting him down. He'd stormed home, venting his rage, ready to drop out. Lucille had wiped her hands, turned to face him, and said softly, "Baby, you don't fight by yelling. You fight by standing. You stand taller. You show them what they can't take away, your dignity." The weight of that memory settled on his chest like a stone. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. Lila had fought. She had stood up, even when she had no power, no protection. That wasn't recklessness. That was courage. Still, the practical side of him couldn't be ignored. He was the CEO of a major firm. Shareholders, media, partners, they all watched every move. One misstep, one controversial hire could ripple outward. And hiring someone like Lila, a woman with a flagged history, a reputation for causing trouble, would stir waves, no doubt. Already the media murmurs had started. Stories hinting that Shaq was too sentimental, too emotional for the cutthroat world of high finance. His phone buzzed. A text from Marla. "Meeting at 3. Travis wants to finalize internship selections. Do you want Lila included on the shortlist?" Shaq stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. Downstairs, Lila sat on a bench outside the HR office, trying to steady her breathing. Her clothes were dry now, but the chill had settled into her bones. She could feel the weight of invisible eyes, staff glancing at her, whispering as they passed. She knew the whispers. She'd lived through them before. Troublemaker, wrong fit, too angry, too emotional. She pressed her hands together tightly, willing herself not to cry. A soft voice startled her. "You okay, miss?" Elijah, the janitor, stood nearby, a mop in hand, eyes filled with quiet concern. "I don't know," Lila whispered. "I think I messed up." Elijah gave a slow, knowing smile. "No, baby. You just walked into a room that wasn't ready for you. That ain't the same as messing up." In his office, Shaq rose to his full height, shoulders squared as he looked out over the rainy skyline. The room behind him was filled with awards, photos, framed magazine covers, symbols of everything he'd built, but none of them mattered as much as the simple question gnawing at him. Who are we if we only lift up the people who already have power? He thought of Lucille again, her voice firm in his memory. You stand taller by lifting someone else. With a slow, deliberate breath, Shaq turned back to his desk and typed a reply. Yes, include Lila. In the boardroom, the mood was tense as the team gathered for the afternoon meeting. Travis sat near the head of the table, fingers drumming impatiently. Marla shuffled papers, glancing nervously between them. Shaq entered last, his presence immediately filling the room, though his expression was calm, almost unreadable. Let's get started, Travis said briskly. We've narrowed the internship candidates to the final list. I propose we proceed without the outlier. Shaq raised an eyebrow. The outlier? Lila Tremont. Travis's tone was smooth, rehearsed. We've all seen the file. She's a potential HR risk. It's not personal, it's business. Shaq's gaze sharpened. Business is personal, Travis. It's made of people. The room fell quiet, tension crackling at the edges. Travis smiled thinly. With respect, Shaq, we can't let sentimentality guide executive decisions. Shaq leaned forward slightly, his massive hands resting on the table. With respect, Travis, we can't let fear guide them either. For a long beat, no one spoke. Marla shifted uncomfortably. Two junior partners exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Shaq spoke again, his voice softer now, but no less firm. We say we stand for innovation, inclusion, Opportunity. Those words mean something. Or they don't. Lila Tremont walked through a storm to get here. She spoke up when others stayed silent. That's the kind of grit this company was built on. Travis's eyes narrowed. So you're willing to risk your reputation? Our reputation over a gamble? Shaq smiled faintly. I'm not gambling, Travis. I'm investing. The meeting ended in uneasy silence, the air thick with unresolved tension. As the others filed out, Travis lingered, watching Shaq with a cool, calculating expression. There was something unspoken there, a deeper current running beneath the surface. Shaq could feel it, the beginnings of a fracture. He exhaled slowly, turning back to the window. Rain still streaked the glass, the city below pulsing with restless energy. Somewhere out there, a mud-covered young woman waited, wondering if the door she'd fought to open was about to slam shut. Shaq closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He knew this decision might cost him, but as Lucille's voice echoed in his memory, one truth rang clear. Some things are worth the risk. The tension in the boardroom was sharp enough to slice the air. Shaquille O'Neal sat at the head of the long walnut table, his hands folded calmly in front of him, but his shoulders carried the weight of every gaze, every whispered judgment pressing in around him. Across the polished surface, the O'Neal Equity board members fidgeted, eyes flicking between one another, the unspoken undercurrents swirling louder than any word in the room. Travis Harlan, the CFO, sat to Shaq's right, legs crossed, fingers steepled under his chin, a tight smile playing on his lips. Look, no one's saying we don't support diversity or innovation, he began smoothly, but we have to think about the company's reputation. Bringing on someone like Lila Tremont, with a history of HR complaints, no elite credentials, no proven corporate experience, it sends the wrong signal. It suggests we're making emotional hires, not strategic ones. Shaq leaned back slightly, his face impassive, but his eyes sharp. Marla Desmond, head of operations, chimed in gently. I agree, Shaq. We have to protect the image we've built. Investors, partners, the media, they're watching. We can't afford to take risks that look like favoritism or charity. There it was, the word that wasn't a word. Charity. The implication that giving Lila a shot wasn't earned, wasn't deserved, but handed over from pity. Shaq exhaled slowly, feeling his pulse steady. Let me ask you something, he said, voice calm but carrying through the room. When we backed those tech startups last year, how many of those founders came from elite backgrounds? A pause. 2 out of 12, Marla admitted quietly. And when we partnered with the community housing project in Detroit, that was a local initiative, Travis said coolly. Not an internal hire. That's different. Different how? Shaq's voice remained smooth, but a razor edge slipped beneath it. When we invest in outsiders from venture worlds, we call it innovation. But when we consider an outsider for an internship, we call it charity. A subtle ripple of discomfort crossed the table. Shaq sat forward, elbows on the table, his massive hands folding together. Let's be honest, folks. You're not worried about her resume. You're worried about the noise around her. You're worried about the fact that she's already challenged authority, that she spoke up when she saw something wrong, and you're worried that bringing her in might make people uncomfortable. Travis's jaw tightened. With respect, Shaq, this isn't about race or class. This is about protecting the company's bottom line. Shaq gave a slow, humorless smile. Funny, because it sure sounds like it's about race and class to me. The words hung there, heavy as stone. Outside the glass walls, Lila sat on a bench, eyes wide as she watched the silhouettes through the frosted panels. She could feel her stomach twisting, every nerve stretched taut. She didn't know the exact words being spoken, but she could read the body language, the rising voices, the way fingers jabbed the air in frustration. Her entire future felt like it was balanced on the edge of that room. Inside, the debate grew sharper. We cannot afford a misstep here. Travis pressed. You've been under media scrutiny for months, Shaq. Every decision is dissected. Do you really want to give them more ammunition? They're already calling you too soft for this role. Shaq's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something colder under the warmth. He'd heard those words before. Too soft, too emotional, too big-hearted. It was the same song, just with a new verse. His phone buzzed silently beside him. He glanced down. Anonymous text. Check her record again. Shaq's stomach tightened. Who was sending this? Why now? He tapped the screen, frowning as another text appeared. You're missing something important. Look deeper. He looked up slowly, eyes scanning the room. Someone in here wanted Lila gone. Badly. But who? And why? Marla cleared her throat. Shaq, maybe we should table this for now. We can move forward with the other candidates and revisit her application later. Shaq shook his head. No. We decide today. Travis smirked faintly. Then let's vote. The board members exchanged glances, tension crackling. One by one they raised hands. Some for, some against. The split was sharper than anyone expected. Shaq sat quietly, watching, letting the full picture settle. He could feel it. The divide not just over Lila, but over the company's soul. What kind of leadership did they want? What kind of values did they claim to hold, versus the ones they actually practiced? As the vote wrapped, Shaq stood slowly, towering over the table. His voice, when it came, was soft but unshakable. Let me remind you all of something. This company exists because people took a chance on me, when I was nothing but a name and a jersey. This company exists because we promised to be different, not just in how we make money, but in how we build people. If we can't stand by that, then we need to take my name off the building. The room fell into a stunned silence. Outside, Lila's hands trembled in her lap as she saw the board members filing out, expressions tight, some avoiding her gaze entirely. She caught sight of Shaq through the glass, his face unreadable, his phone still in his hand. She didn't know yet about the anonymous messages. She didn't know someone inside was working hard to push her out, even before she had a foot in the door. But Shaq knew, and the knot in his chest was tightening. As the rain hammered the windows and the tension settled like a storm cloud, Shaq realized this was no longer just about one intern. It was about trust, about loyalty, about who was pulling the strings behind the scenes, and what they were willing to risk to control the game. And the game, he knew now, had only just begun. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone at his desk late into the evening, the skyline of Manhattan glowing beyond the glass walls, the rain having finally tapered into a misty drizzle. The boardroom battle still echoed in his mind. Raised voices, subtle barbs, the way Travis Harlan's smile had barely concealed his satisfaction when Lila's name was nearly struck from the candidate list. But Shaq hadn't let it happen. Not yet. And now, he was determined to know why Travis had been so invested in shutting her down. He opened the file again, the one the anonymous text had pointed him toward. His massive hands moved surprisingly gently over the keyboard as he dug deeper into the HR archives, pulling old corporate complaint logs and cross-referencing names. At first, there was nothing unusual. Lila Tremont's formal discrimination complaint had been filed 2 years ago, listed under a company called Briarstone Consulting. She'd alleged wage discrimination and racial bias in promotion. But then something caught Shaq's eye. Briarstone's executive team. Specifically the name on the CEO line, Richard Harlan. Shaq's brow furrowed. He leaned back slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. Richard Harlan. Travis's brother. It all clicked. The relentless pushback, the sharp disdain, the eagerness to paint Lila as a troublemaker and bury her before she could get near the company. This wasn't just about corporate caution. This was personal. Travis wasn't protecting O'Neal equity. He was protecting family. Shaq's stomach twisted, not in anger, not yet, but in deep, unsettled disappointment. He had worked hard to build a leadership team that reflected his values, fairness, innovation, integrity. But here was one of his top people using backdoor influence, feeding poison into the process, twisting the system to settle a private score. He rose from his chair, pacing slowly to the window. His reflection stared back at him. The 7-1 giant, the public face of the company, the symbol of success. But beneath the public image, he knew the truth. Leadership wasn't about the face you put on for the cameras. It was about the decisions you made in quiet rooms, when no one was watching. As he gazed out at the city, a memory drifted up uninvited. His mother, Lucille, sitting on their old apartment stoop, telling him stories about her factory days. She'd worked under managers who smiled to her face and cut her hours behind her back, who praised her in meetings but passed her over for raises. "Baby, racism don't always show its teeth," she'd told him. "Sometimes it's just a quiet door closing where you can't see it." Shaq felt the weight of those words, now like never before. He turned back to his desk, fists clenching slowly. The stakes were clear. If he confronted Travis, the fallout would ripple through the company. Travis wasn't just a CFO. He was connected to board members, investors, media contacts. Exposing him could fracture the leadership, invite scandal, even shake shareholder confidence. But staying silent meant letting the company slip into the same quiet corruption it was supposed to stand against. A soft knock at the door pulled Shaq from his thoughts. Marla peeked in, her expression cautious. "Shaq? You okay?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "Yeah, Marla. Just thinking." She stepped inside hesitantly. "Look, I know today was rough. But I need you to know not everyone's against you on this. I admire how you stood up for her. I just want us to be smart about it." Shaq studied her carefully. "Do you know who Richard Harlan is?"
Marla blinked.
"Of course. Travis's brother. Big name in consulting." Shaq watched her reaction. She didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. She didn't know. This wasn't her play. He nodded slowly. "Thanks, Marla. That helps." After she left, Shaq sat back down, rubbing a hand over his face. He pulled up Lila's file once more, reading her complaint line by line. She'd raised concerns about wage gaps, been ignored, then pushed out. Nothing illegal on paper, but the pattern was clear. And now, here she was again, facing the same kind of quiet sabotage, this time at Shaq's own table. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You see it yet? Don't let him win." Shaq exhaled slowly, heart pounding. Someone inside was feeding him this. Someone who wanted Travis exposed. But who? And why stay hidden? He looked around his office, the walls lined with awards and jerseys. Pictures of his mother, his children, his proudest moments. And yet none of those victories mattered. If he let his own company become just another place where power protected itself, and the truth got buried. Downstairs, Lila sat quietly in the HR lounge, tapping her foot nervously, waiting for the final decision. She had no idea the storm swirling around her. No idea that the fight wasn't just about her resume anymore. It was about whether O'Neal Equity was the company it claimed to be, or just another glass tower built on hollow promises. Shaq closed his eyes, taking a long breath. He knew what needed to be done. But the question gnawed at him. Could he pull this thread without unraveling everything he'd built? By Wednesday morning, the air inside O'Neal Equity Partners was charged with a tension everyone could feel but no one dared name. Whispers floated between departments. Text threads burned through with speculation. And even the senior partners' offices weren't immune to the ripple of unease. No one quite understood what was happening, only that something had cracked open. Shaquille O'Neal, the CEO, the giant whose name crowned the glass tower they all worked in, had issued an unprecedented announcement late the night before. A company-wide forum. No closed-door decision. No executive-only meeting. No backroom vote. Instead, an open floor where every employee, from junior analyst to senior partner, would witness and participate in a conversation about fairness, hiring, and the values O'Neal Equity claimed to stand for. Most thought it was madness. Some thought it was brilliance. Everyone was waiting to see if Shaq's gamble would pay off or implode spectacularly. As the giant conference hall filled, employees murmured nervously. Marla Desmond sat near the front, arms crossed, eyes darting anxiously between her peers. Travis Harlan, ever cool, leaned back in his chair, an amused smile playing at the corners of his mouth, whispering something to another executive. Near the back, Lila Tremont stood awkwardly, smoothing the wrinkles in her only halfway dry blouse. She had been summoned personally by Shaq, not to hide, not to wait outside, but to speak. Her stomach churned. She wasn't ready for this. She had no polished speech, no prep, just the raw, tangled truth of her story. Shaq stepped onto the stage, dressed in a tailored dark suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled up. His presence filled the space without effort. He didn't tap the mic. He didn't need to. His voice rolled out across the room, low and steady. "I called this meeting because something important came up this week," Shaq began. "Something that goes deeper than one hire, deeper than one resume, deeper than one decision. It's about who we are as a company, and who we want to be." A hush fell over the room. Phones slipped quietly into pockets. Whispered conversations died mid-sentence. Shaq continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "When we started O'Neal Equity, we promised to be different, to stand for opportunity, fairness, inclusion, not just on paper, not just when it was easy, but when it mattered. We promised to back people, not just pedigrees, to bet on resilience, not just resumes. And now we're facing a test of that promise. He gestured gently toward the back. Lila, will you join me? All heads turned. Lila felt the ground sway under her feet. Her legs moved on instinct, shaky but determined, carrying her forward as the sea of faces parted. She stepped onto the stage beside Shaq, heart hammering in her chest, throat dry. Shaq gave her an encouraging nod, then stepped back, letting the spotlight shift. Lila took a shaky breath, hands clasped tightly together. Not sure what I'm supposed to say here, she admitted softly, voice cracking. But I guess I'll just tell you why I'm standing here at all. The room waited. Breath held. I grew up in Winslow, Arkansas, Lila began. A little town you've probably never heard of. My mom cleaned houses. My dad left when I was 10. I worked 2 jobs through community college. I didn't have connections. I didn't have mentors. I had a dream, and a lot of nights wondering if I was crazy for thinking I could ever make it out. Her voice wavered, but steadied. I applied to companies where no one answered me back. I showed up to interviews where they looked right past me, and when I finally got a job, I watched the people who looked like me, the ones from poor towns, the black and brown workers, the single moms get passed over, underpaid and ignored. She swallowed hard. When I spoke up, they called me difficult, a liability, a risk, and they pushed me out. Lila turned slightly, looking over the audience. I didn't come here today, expecting a job handed to me. I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a place that didn't see people like me as a risk, but as a resource. The silence was electric. No one shifted. No one coughed. No one pretended to check their watch. Shaq stepped forward again, his deep voice filling the space. You've all heard the story. You know the debate. So here's the question. Are we going to stand by what we say we believe? Are we going to be the company that takes a chance on grit, on resilience, on raw, tested strength? At the edge of the room, Travis watched with narrowed eyes, his usual smirk tight. He didn't speak, but Shaq could feel the challenge radiating from him. Shaq drew a slow breath, eyes sweeping the room. This isn't just about Lila. This is about every decision we make from here forward. Do we stay safe, or do we stand for something bigger? The tension stretched until it felt like the walls themselves might crack. No one knew how this would land. Would employees rally behind the message, or would the executives call it reckless, a publicity stunt, a sentimental overreach? The suspense pressed in tighter when Shaq's phone buzzed again on the table beside him. A new message. Anonymous. Watch carefully. You're about to find out who's really on your side. Shaq's eyes flicked to Travis, whose fingers were tapping a private message into his phone. Quiet moves. Hidden game. The stakes had never been higher. As Lila stepped back from the mic, Shaq knew one thing for sure. Today wasn't just about saving one woman's shot. It was about defining the legacy of everything he'd built, and whether he had the backbone to hold that line when it mattered most. The whole office, from interns to executives, held its breath. The hallways of O'Neal Equity Partners, usually humming with controlled energy, felt thick with something heavier now. Suspicion. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his private office, staring at his phone screen, the anonymous messages replaying over and over in his mind. Watch carefully. You're about to find out who's really on your side. For days, Shaq had believed the pushback against Lila Tremont was Travis Harlan's doing alone. Personal, vindictive, a brother protecting a brother, but the anonymous tips, the leaked documents, the whispers threading through the company were too coordinated, too layered to be the work of one man. Somewhere in the shadows, a second player was moving pieces. Shaq's heart was heavy, not just with anger, but with a deeper ache, disappointment. This was his company, his dream, built on promises of fairness, inclusion, second chances. Yet now he saw clearly how thin that dream had stretched, how the systems inside the tower mirrored the ones he'd fought his whole life to rise beyond. A soft knock at the door pulled him back. Lila stepped in hesitantly, her eyes wide, her hands clasped together nervously. You wanted to see me? Shaq gestured to the chair across from him. Come in, Lila. Close the door. She settled into the seat, shoulders tight, gaze flicking between the massive man across from her and the scattered papers on his desk. Did I mess something up in the meeting? Shaq gave a faint, tired smile. No. You did good, real good. But we've got a bigger problem. He leaned forward, hands steepled. I've been getting anonymous messages, tips, warnings, about you, about this company, about someone trying to sabotage both. At first I thought it was Travis, acting alone, but now, He let the sentence hang. Lila frowned, her brow furrowing. You think there's someone else? Shaq nodded slowly. Someone inside. Someone who doesn't want me running this place the way I do. Lila was quiet for a long moment, then said carefully, at my last job, when they wanted to push me out, they didn't do it openly. They let little things slip. Project files missing. Memos I was never copied on. They made me look careless, like I wasn't paying attention, until I started questioning myself. Shaq's gaze sharpened. That sound familiar? Lila nodded, her voice steadier now. What if the person feeding you those tips isn't just helping you? What if they're pushing you towards someone, making you look one way while they work from the other? Shaq exhaled slowly, his mind spinning through the past few weeks. The sudden press leaks, the boardroom backstabs, the tensions rising just as the company was about to secure a major new round of funding. He pulled up a list on his tablet, showing recent internal communications flagged by IT. Look at this. Anonymous emails, confidential reports, security breaches. They've all been traced back to 2 nodes, one linked to Travis's assistant, and one, his voice lowered, linked to Marla. Lila's eyes widened. Marla? She's been trying to help you. Shaq shook his head slowly. She's been pretending to help. The realization hit hard, twisting in his gut. Marla Desmond, head of operations, the one who always positioned herself as the voice of reason, the steady hand balancing his idealism. She'd been quietly maneuvering behind the scenes, feeding him just enough concern to steer his decisions, just enough doubt to keep him leaning on her guidance. Lila leaned forward, her voice tense. So what do we do? Shaq stared out the window, watching the city pulse below, the lights flickering like stars caught in glass. His reflection stared back at him, lined with exhaustion, but still unbroken. We follow the thread, we gather proof, and we don't let them see us coming. For the next hour, Shaq and Lila huddled over documents, messages, internal logs. Lila's sharp eye caught patterns Shaq had missed. Inconsistencies in meeting notes, discrepancies in hiring recommendations, subtle shifts in financial forecasts. Where Travis had been blunt, Marla had been subtle, embedding her influence so smoothly that even Shaq with all his experience hadn't noticed. The betrayal stung deeper than Shaq wanted to admit. He had trusted Marla, leaned on her. She had been with him from the early days of the firm, one of the first to champion his move from sports icon to corporate leader. But now, piece by piece, the truth was emerging. She'd been building her own web, playing both sides, positioning herself as the inevitable successor if or when Shaq stumbled. Lila sat back, rubbing her temples. It's not just about me, is it? It's about control. Shaq gave a grim smile. You got that right. The room fell quiet. Shaq felt the ache of responsibility press against his chest, the weight of knowing that every choice he made now would ripple through not just his company, but the lives of everyone who worked there. His dream of a just, inclusive company wasn't just under attack, it was fracturing from within. But as he looked across the table at Lila, muddy boots tucked under her chair, eyes sharp with determination, he felt something stir, resolve. He wasn't out yet. He wasn't beaten, and he sure as hell wasn't done fighting. Long after the sun dipped behind the skyline, the O'Neal Equity Partners tower remained lit, its top floors glowing against the velvet night. Down below, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, taxis slicing through the dark, streetlights flickering, pedestrians bracing against the chill. But up in the corner office, a different kind of storm was unfolding. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone, elbows on his desk, the entire spread of the company's future laid out before him, spreadsheets glowing on multiple monitors, files stacked in neat piles, emails blinking relentlessly on his phone. He leaned forward, massive hands steepled under his chin, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Fire Travis. Shake up the board, risk alienating key shareholders who had backed the firm since its early days. If he took down Travis Harlan and exposed Marla Desmond's hidden plays, he'd be gutting the leadership team he'd spent years assembling. He'd be igniting a scandal big enough to hit headlines, big enough to rattle investor confidence, big enough to mark his name not just as a basketball legend or a celebrity CEO, but as the man who cracked his own empire apart. But if he stayed silent, if he let Lila Tremont fall, if he let Marla's manipulation slide, if he looked the other way to keep the company stable, then everything he claimed to stand for, fairness, second chances, lifting the overlooked, would become nothing more than hollow branding. Shaq exhaled slowly, his breath fogging faintly against the cool window pane. He'd never felt his size more acutely. 7'1", 325 pounds of muscle, and presence, and still the weight of decision-making. The sheer loneliness of leadership dwarfed even him. The office door creaked open softly, startling him. Lucille O'Neal stepped in, her silhouette familiar and grounding, her coat draped over her shoulders. Shaq blinked in surprise. "Mama, what are you doing here this late?" Lucille gave him a small, knowing smile. "I could ask you the same thing, baby." She crossed the room, setting her purse down gently, smoothing her hands across the front of her sweater. "I heard about the stir you caused this week." Shaq chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, maybe I stirred too hard." Lucille's eyes softened, but she didn't let him off easy. "You're sitting here thinking if you pull the wrong thread, the whole thing's gonna unravel, aren't you?" Shaq sighed. "Feels like that." She settled into the chair across from him, folding her hands calmly. "You've always been strong, Shaquille. Bigger, louder, more powerful than the people around you. But you weren't given strength just to crush problems. You were given strength to carry others, to stand tall so they can stand too." Shaq felt his chest tighten, the old ache of being a black man in power, of knowing every misstep would be amplified, every decision scrutinized under a harsher lens. "Mama, if I do this, if I shake up my own team, they'll say I'm reckless. They'll say I'm emotional. They'll say I'm too soft, too stubborn, too black to lead in their world." Lucille reached across the desk, placing her hand gently over his. "Baby, they said all that before you even got here. They said it when you were 15, when you were 25, when you were 40. The question ain't what they say. The question is, what do you stand on when they talk?" Shaq closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand, the steadiness of her voice. He remembered the playground fights he'd walked away from, the college rooms he'd sat quietly in while others talked over him, the meetings where he'd been underestimated until the numbers proved them wrong. And through it all, Lucille's voice had been his anchor. "You rise by lifting. You don't crush to climb." His phone buzzed sharply against the desk. A message. Final decision due by 8. He straightened slowly, squaring his shoulders. "I need to do this, Mama." Lucille smiled softly, her eyes glistening with pride. "I know, baby. And you'll do it right." As she left, Shaq stood alone once more, staring out at the sleeping city. He knew the headlines tomorrow might call him a fool, a risk, a CEO who let his heart rule his head. But as his reflection stared back from the dark glass, he knew he couldn't lead by fear. Not now, not ever. He pulled up the final draft of his internal announcement. Hands steady now, voice quiet as he read it aloud to himself. Effective immediately, Travis Harlan, Chief Financial Officer, is terminated for breach of ethical conduct and undisclosed conflicts of interest. An internal review will assess further leadership accountability. We reaffirm our commitment to building a company grounded in fairness, resilience, and opportunity for all. He saved the draft, paused, drew a long breath, and hit send. The message echoed through the tower, lighting up inboxes, sparking shockwaves, shattering the carefully managed calm that had cloaked the company for so long. Across the city, phones buzzed to life, whispers rising, questions flooding boardrooms and back channels alike. But in his office, Shaq stood tall, shoulders back, heart steady. He knew the storm was only beginning. He knew the fallout could be brutal, the costs high. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt something solid under his feet. The quiet certainty that he was doing what was right, no matter the price. And somewhere down in the lobby, a young woman named Lila waited. Not knowing yet how deeply her presence had shaken the tower, or how much farther this fight still had to go. The lights in the O'Neal Equity Building stayed on all night. Morning broke over the Manhattan skyline in a blaze of gold and silver, sunlight spilling between glass towers like a promise. But inside O'Neal Equity Partners, the air was thick with tension. Every desk buzzed with whispers. Every hallway carried hushed speculation. Something big was coming. Everyone felt it. At precisely 9 a.m., the all-hands meeting was called. Employees filed into the main auditorium, a sweeping room lined with tall windows that poured sunlight over polished wood floors. Senior partners sat stiffly at the front, their faces masks of composure. Junior analysts clustered in groups, murmuring nervously, and on the stage, standing alone in a dark suit with no tie, Shaquille O'Neal waited. When the room finally quieted, Shaq stepped to the mic. His deep voice rumbled out, smooth but carrying the weight of decision. Thank you all for being here. I called this meeting because today marks a turning point, not just for this company, but for the values we stand on. A ripple of uneasy glances passed through the crowd. In the front row, Travis Harlan sat with a calculated smirk, legs crossed, one arm draped casually over the chair back. He had heard the rumors. He wasn't worried. Shaq's gaze swept the room, his voice steady. Last night, I finalized a review of recent hiring decisions, internal leaks, and ethical conflicts. As of this morning, I'm announcing the immediate termination of Travis Harlan, Chief Financial Officer, for breach of ethical conduct and undisclosed conflicts of interest. The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, eyes flying to Travis, who bolted upright, face draining of color. Shaq, you can't, he started, but Shaq raised one massive hand, calm and final. We will be conducting a full leadership audit. Shaq continued, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Our hiring practices will be revamped to ensure fairness and inclusion at every level. We will not be a company that protects power at the expense of people. In the back, Lila Tremont stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Shaq's gaze found her in the crowd. He offered a small nod. Lila Tremont, you walked through a storm to get here. You showed grit, honesty, and strength. I'm offering you the internship. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. Lila took a trembling step forward, then another, her voice cracking faintly as she spoke. Thank you, but I have to say no. A stunned hush fell over the room. Even Shaq blinked in surprise. Lila drew a shaky breath. I don't just want to intern here. I want to work with you, Mr. O'Neal. I want to help fix this system, not just enter it. I want to help redesign this company, from the ground up, so that people like me don't just get in, they get to rise. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then Shaq smiled. Slow, wide, proud. Then let's get to work. The room erupted into applause, but underneath the celebration, something darker flickered. Shaq's phone buzzed softly on the podium. Another anonymous message. You're not done. Look left. Shaq's eyes sharpened, scanning the crowd, and there, standing near the exit, face pale, eyes darting, was Marla Desmond. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand, her body stiff as if she were frozen mid-step. The realization crashed over Shaq like a wave. Marla was the second saboteur. Even as the applause swelled, his mind locked onto the truth. She had positioned herself carefully, playing the role of ally, whispering caution while feeding chaos, hoping to be the last one standing if Shaq's world crumbled. Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time Shaq saw her clearly, not as the loyal operations head, but as a strategist, a survivor, a woman who had been working both sides of the boardroom. He felt no rage, no outburst. Only a cold, steady certainty. This fight wasn't over. As the morning sun poured over the company, transforming its walls into gold-lit glass, Shaq felt the shape of his legacy shifting. Not a legacy built on championships or wealth, or fame, but on moral courage, on standing firm even when it cost something real. And as he stood on that stage, beside a mud-stained young woman who had refused to break, he knew one thing for certain. The tower's foundation was stronger now, but the battle to keep it standing had only just begun. What would you do when power, loyalty, and truth collide? This story isn't just about one CEO or one company. It's about all of us and the choices we face every day. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of ambition, justice, and the fight to build something real. Because the biggest stories aren't finished when the credits roll. They're only just beginning.